picture this, 1914, Europe's on the verge of falling into World War I. But here in America, it's a different story. We've got the excitement of cities like New York, the peace of rural communities, and President Woodrow Wilson, who's determined to keep us out of the fight. Can you imagine that optimism, that feeling that we could just stay separate from all that chaos going on over in Europe? But history tells a different story, right?
It does.
Today we're going to dive deep into those years leading up to when America got involved in World War I. Exploring all those things that shattered our neutrality and really pushed us onto that world stage.
What really gets me is how much this time period tested America's whole commitment to isolationism. Think back to presidents like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
They warned us about getting mixed up in foreign affairs. But in a world that was becoming so connected, through trade communication, even the threat of war, could America really just stand back and watch?
That's the big question that loomed over everything, wasn't it?
Right.
Then in 1915, a real tragedy happened, one that just shook America to its core. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania.
The Lusitania was a British ocean liner, and when it was sunk by a German U-boat, it resulted in the death of over 1,200 people, including 128 Americans.
All right.
Now, to understand the outrage this caused, we got to remember that unrestricted submarine warfare was a pretty new and brutal tactic. German U-boats were attacking any ship, no matter who it belonged to, if they suspected it was helping the Allies. It was a big change from how naval warfare was usually fought.
It's just hard to imagine the impact of reading those accounts, seeing those pictures of the victims, especially all those children lost at sea.
Right.
One survivor, Michael G. Byrne, described it as a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno.
Of course, we also need to look at the sinking of the Lusitania in the context of the British naval blockade of Germany. This blockade was really effective in cutting off important supplies. It caused a humanitarian crisis in Germany. From their point of view, unrestricted submarine warfare was a last resort, a desperate response to what they saw as a threat to their very existence.
It just reminds us that even in war, there are multiple perspectives, often conflicting stories. But for a lot of Americans, the sinking of the Lusitania was a turning point.
Yeah.
It really shifted public opinion against Germany.
Absolutely. And it put enormous pressure on President Wilson, who was desperately trying to stay neutral. He issued proclamations urging Americans to remain impartial in thought and deed. Imagine trying to keep a whole nation united when the world around you is falling apart.
Almost impossible. It's just an unbelievable amount of pressure he was under.
Yeah.
And as if things weren't complicated enough, we had the Black Tom explosion in 1916.
The Black Tom explosion was this massive act of sabotage targeting an ammunition depot on Black Tom Island in New York Harbor. The explosion was so powerful that it damaged the Statue of Liberty and broke windows for miles around.
Wow.
This event was different from the sinking of the Lusitania. This happened right here on American soil. And while it was never officially proven, evidence points to German agents being behind it.
Talk about a wake-up call. We had a German spy, Franz Rintelen, operating right under our noses, running this whole elaborate scheme of espionage and sabotage. Suddenly, the war felt a lot closer to home.
Rintelen's actions show us all those hidden parts of the conflict, the shadowy world of espionage that was happening even while America was trying to stay neutral.
And all this is going on while America's getting ready for the 1916 presidential election.
Yeah.
What a time to be alive. Wilson's running for re-election against Charles Evans Hughes, and the war is a major issue in the campaign.
The 1916 election was incredibly close. Wilson campaigned on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," appealing to that desire for peace that many Americans felt. But his opponent, Charles Evans Hughes, had the backing of big names like Teddy Roosevelt, who wanted America to get more involved.
Roosevelt was always a powerful figure, wasn't he? He saw the war as a fight between good and evil. He really believed America had a moral duty to join the fight.
Yeah.
Right.
Roosevelt's perspective resonated with some, but ultimately Wilson won the election, though by a very small margin. It seemed like for now the American people had chosen peace.
But peace was a very fragile thing in those uncertain times.
Absolutely. And only a few months into Wilson's second term, a secret message would come to light that would completely shatter any hope of staying out of the war: the Zimmermann telegram.
Right.
So the Zimmermann telegram was a coded message sent by the German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. Just imagine the shock when British intelligence intercepted this message and figured out what it said.
This wasn't just, some everyday diplomatic note, right? What made this telegram such a big deal?
Well, the telegram proposed this wild alliance. Germany was asking Mexico to join their side in a war against the United States. And in return, Germany promised to help Mexico get back territories they'd lost in the Mexican-American War. Places like Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
Oh, that's a lot to take in. All of a sudden, the enemy wasn't just across the ocean. It felt like they were right there on our doorstep, maybe even plotting with our neighbor to take back land. That must have really freaked people out.
It definitely did. The Zimmerman telegram had a huge impact on how Americans felt. People saw it as a direct threat to America's independence and security. It fueled all this anti-German feeling and really pushed the country towards war.
So what about Wilson? How did he handle this? I mean, he just won an election promising to keep us out of war.
Well, you gotta understand that Wilson was really committed to peace. He spent years trying to work out a negotiated settlement to the war in Europe. He believed in a peace without victory, a peace based on fairness and understanding, not on who wins and who loses.
So this telegram must have been like a punch in the gut to his hopes for peace.
Absolutely. And then to make things even worse, just a few weeks after the telegram went public, Germany announced they were going back to unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant that any ship, even American merchant ships, could be attacked by German U-boats.
So it was like, despite all his efforts, all his idealism, Wilson was painted into a corner.
In many ways, yeah. Those events in early 1917, from the Zimmerman telegram to the return of unrestricted submarine warfare, it created this perfect storm that made it almost impossible for America to stay neutral.
And then on April 2nd, 1917, Wilson went before Congress and gave his famous war message.
That speech is a really powerful document. In it, Wilson lays out his argument for war, saying that America has a moral obligation to stand up for democracy and freedom against German aggression. He talks about making the world safe for democracy and imagines a new world order based on countries working together and looking out for each other.
It's powerful stuff. But was it really all about these noble ideals? Weren't there also some practical reasons, like economics and politics involved?
Of course, it's never that straightforward. Wilson's idealism was real. But we can't ignore the fact that America had strong economic ties to the Allies. American businesses had been lending money and selling supplies to Britain and France, and those ties had only gotten stronger as the war went on.
So maybe there's a bit of self-interest mixed in with those moral arguments.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that both idealism and self-interest were at play. Some historians say that economic factors were the main reason America got involved, while others point to Wilson's idealism as the driving force. It's likely that both played a part.
It sounds like trying to figure out those motivations is like trying to untangle a really complicated knot.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think, what if the Zimmerman telegram hadn't been intercepted? Or what if Germany hadn't gone back to unrestricted submarine warfare? Would America have managed to stay out of the war?
It's interesting to think about those what-if scenarios. But the fact is, America did enter the war. And that decision changed a lot of things. It's hard to overstate just how much of an impact America's entry into World War I had on the world. It really tipped the balance in favor of the Allies and led to Germany's defeat, but it also changed America's place in the world forever.
Before the war, America had pretty much stuck to this idea of isolationism. We focused on our own business and tried to stay out of foreign entanglements. But after the war, America came out as a global power, a major player on the world stage.
Right. Yeah. And that change from isolationism to global engagement had these long-lasting effects. I mean, it shaped the entire 20th century and beyond. But in the midst of all those political and economic consequences, we can't forget about the human cost of the war.
Absolutely. World War I was this incredibly huge and brutal conflict. Millions of soldiers died on those battlefields in Europe, and countless civilians got caught in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you read those personal stories from the people who lived through those years, you really get a sense of the massive suffering, the loss, how it disrupted everyday life. It's a good reminder that war isn't just about statistics and strategies. It's about individual lives being shattered, families ripped apart, and a whole generation dealing with trauma.
And those individual stories, they often get overshadowed by those big historical narratives. We talk about the political maneuvering and the military campaigns, the economic fallout. But it's those human stories that really make the past come alive. They help us connect with the people who lived through those crazy times.
Like the story from Michael G. Byrne, the survivor of the Lusitania sinking. He talks about the chaos, the panic, the desperate fight to stay alive in that freezing Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
It's just this chilling reminder of what war really costs. A cost that reaches far beyond the battlefield.
You know, it's crucial to remember that even in the middle of war, there are acts of bravery, compassion, resilience. People who put their lives on the line to help others. Families who find strength when everything's falling apart, and communities that band together to support those in need.
Right. Those stories of hope and resilience in the face of such darkness, they're just as important to remember as the stories of loss and suffering. And they offer a valuable perspective as we try to make sense of history.
Absolutely. And as we think back on America's path from neutrality to war, it's worth asking ourselves, what lessons can we take from this time? How can we use those lessons to deal with the challenges we face today?
That's a good question, isn't it? And maybe by studying history, by really digging into those tough questions, we can better understand ourselves and the world we live in.
Right. And hopefully that understanding can help us face the challenges of the present and work towards a more peaceful and just world.
Very well said. And if you find these deep dives into history as fascinating as we do, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of the past, present, and future. We'll catch you next time for another journey into the depths of knowledge.